For privacy reasons, names and places have been changed. This story is inspired by true events.
In the summer of 2011, beneath the towering cathedrals of granite and the endless hush of Yosemite's ancient wilderness, Selena Farah vanished as if swallowed by the earth itself. Search parties scoured valleys, rivers, and ridgelines, yet the mountains yielded nothing. For 3 long years her name became a whisper, a wound, a legend. Then, hidden high in the branches of a cedar, an abandoned cabin was found. Inside, her skeletal form, her belongings untouched, and a notebook scrawled with one harrowing confession. Someone was here last night. What unfolded was not closure, but a mystery more terrifying than disappearance.
The summer of 2011 arrived late in Yosemite, with snow still melting across the high meadows and waterfalls roaring louder than usual. On the morning of June 12th, Selena Venra, 33 years old, parked her Subaru at the Tuolumne Meadows trailhead and began what she promised her family would be a 6-day solo trek. A Reno-based travel writer and environmentalist, Selena was known for her balance of caution and independence. She carried 2 maps, a GPS unit, and had logged her planned route with the ranger station before setting out. Friends described her as meticulous, but drawn to the silence of wilderness in a way that made people think she belonged more to forests than to city streets. Before losing cell service, she sent her younger brother a final message. 6 days off the grid, back June 17th. Don't worry. Those were the last words anyone received from her. The first days of her hike went as expected. She was seen briefly by another group of backpackers on her second day, heading toward Vogelsang Peak, a place she had written about wanting to photograph at sunrise. The group remembered her vividly, a slim woman with auburn hair tied under a sun-bleached bandana, carrying a camera that seemed heavier than her pack. They said she was friendly, calm, and confident. Yet when rangers later retraced her route, they found her second campsite abandoned but strangely tidy. Tent rolled, food sealed, journal tucked away. It looked less like someone interrupted a trip and more like someone had been called away from it. When Selena missed her planned return date and her car remained untouched at the trailhead, her family grew frantic. Search and rescue teams were deployed within 24 hours. For 3 straight weeks, helicopters scanned the granite cliffs, dogs traced faint scents through damp forest floors, and volunteers crisscrossed miles of trail. They found fragments of other lives, an old fire ring, discarded clothing from past hikers, animal bones, but no trace of Selena. To complicate matters, storms rolled through the Sierra, dropping sudden curtains of rain and even pockets of sleet, erasing what little evidence might have been there. The search ended with nothing more than theories: that she slipped into one of the river's violent currents, that she fell into a crevasse, or that she had chosen not to be found. But among those closest to her, doubt lingered. Selena had been cautious to the point of annoyance, always double-checking supplies, always logging her routes. Her brother argued she would never simply vanish without leaving something behind. Then another piece of information surfaced. A neighbor back in Reno, a man nearly 10 years older than her, had been in escalating conflict with her just weeks before she left. She had even told her sister over the phone, "If something ever happens to me, it won't be an accident." At the time, no one thought much of it. But after she disappeared without a trace, that remark began to sound like something else entirely. Not a warning of nature, but of a human shadow following her into the woods.
The official search for Selena Vera stretched on for nearly a month, consuming the summer of 2011 in Yosemite. At its peak, more than 100 rangers, search and rescue volunteers, and even military-trained teams scoured the backcountry. Helicopters hovered low over granite domes, their blades chopping the silence of valleys that had heard nothing louder than thunder for centuries. Dogs traced faint scent trails, only to lose them where snowmelt swelled the creeks into icy torrents. Teams found small clues that seemed at first promising, but ultimately meant nothing. A boot print that didn't match her size, a piece of cloth that belonged to another hiker, an old abandoned fire pit deep in the trees. Each discovery raised hope, then collapsed into disappointment. After 3 weeks, with storms returning and resources thinning, the search was scaled back. The official statement was painfully sterile. Despite exhaustive efforts, no evidence of Ms. Vera's whereabouts has been located. She is presumed deceased. But for Selina's family, the closure never came. Her brother insisted in interview after interview that she was too experienced to simply vanish. She wasn't careless, he told local news. If she got lost, she'd mark her trail. If she was hurt, she'd leave signs. This isn't like her. His certainty fed the growing unease among friends and neighbors back in Reno, where Selina had lived in a modest duplex on the city's quieter outskirts. That unease sharpened into suspicion when her sister revealed something Selina had said just weeks before the trip. "If anything happens to me, it won't be an accident. Daniel has been threatening me." Daniel Rowe, 39 years old, lived next door to Selina. Described as reclusive and volatile, he had been in repeated disputes with her over property lines, noise, and his habit of leaving broken equipment scattered in the shared driveway. More troubling were the confrontations that escalated in the spring of 2011. According to court documents later unsealed, Rowe had shouted at Selina during one argument, telling her, "You'll regret crossing me. People like you don't just get away with this." Another neighbor recalled him muttering outside her door late one night. Though Selina filed a complaint with the property manager, she stopped short of involving the police. Friends said she didn't want to poke the bear, but privately she admitted she was nervous. When investigators pieced this together after her disappearance, Rowe quickly became their prime suspect. Detectives searched his home, seizing journals, a computer, and outdoor gear. He was arrested on suspicion of stalking and potentially involved in Selina's disappearance. The community split down the middle. Some believed justice was finally being served. Others said it was just convenient scapegoating. For 2 months, Daniel sat in custody, denying any involvement. The media latched on to the story, painting him as the angry loner who might have followed her into Yosemite. It wouldn't be the first time someone carried a grudge into the wilderness, one TV anchor said grimly during a nightly broadcast. But then the cracks in the case appeared. There was no DNA, no physical evidence linking Rowe to Yosemite at all. His cell phone records placed him in Reno during the critical days. Co-workers testified that he had clocked in at a night shift the same week Selina disappeared. As the holes widened, prosecutors were forced to back down. Daniel Rowe was released, though his reputation never recovered. In interviews afterward, he remained defensive but oddly resigned. "They wanted me to be the monster. I'm not, but once people believe it, there's no taking it back." With the arrest unraveling, suspicion shifted elsewhere. Rangers whispered about strange signs found in Yosemite's remoter corners, crude shelters, platforms lashed into trees, evidence of poachers or survivalists living off-grid. Though never officially tied to Selina's case, these rumors took on a life of their own. Some hikers claimed to hear voices in the forest at night, or even faint cries echoing through the granite canyons. No official reports confirmed these accounts, but they kept the mystery alive. By late 2012, Selina's story had transformed from an unresolved disappearance into a ghost story told around campfires and climbing gyms. The careful hiker who vanished without a trace, the angry neighbor who might have done it, and the possibility that something or someone was still out there in the deep woods.
3 years passed before the forest gave up its secret. In August of 2014, 2 seasoned climbers, both locals who knew Yosemite's backcountry like the backs of their calloused hands, set out to scout a remote granite wall near Cathedral Creek, a section rarely visited except by the most adventurous. While bushwhacking through thick cedar groves, one of them noticed something strange, a sharp line that didn't match the forest's natural geometry. At first, he thought it was a trick of light, but as they pushed closer, they realized it was the corner of a wooden structure wedged into the branches of a massive cedar tree, nearly 15 feet above the ground. The boards were weathered gray, half hidden under moss and pine needles, blending so completely with the bark that from any other angle, it might have looked like nothing more than part of the forest. Intrigued, the climbers rigged ropes and hauled themselves up, expecting to find perhaps an old ranger lookout or a poacher's forgotten hide. What they found instead would send shockwaves through the community that had long since mourned Selina Vavra. Inside the cabin, the air was damp, stale, and suffocating, filled with the unmistakable odor of decay. In the dim light that filtered through the warped planks, they saw a figure slumped against the far wall. It was skeletal now, clothing in tatters, long hair still clinging in matted strands to a skull that tilted toward the door. The climbers, shaken, climbed back down and immediately reported their find to rangers. Within hours, law enforcement teams arrived, sealing off the area. When investigators entered the cabin, the details only deepened the mystery. The narrow door had been nailed shut from the inside. Whoever had been inside had sealed themselves in, hammering crooked nails into the wooden frame as if to keep something out. The boards near the door were clawed with scratches, deep grooves carved by fingernails or something sharp, the kind of frantic markings of someone desperate to escape but unable to. Scattered on the wooden floor were personal belongings that told investigators exactly who the remains belonged to before DNA confirmed it. A faded Nevada driver's license, a silver locket with her initials engraved, and a weather-beaten notebook. On its first page, written in hurried, uneven script, were words that made seasoned officers shiver. "I'm still alive. Someone was here last night, trying to stay calm. If anyone finds this..." The writing trailed off, blotched and smeared, as if she had stopped mid-sentence. The rest of the notebook was blank or ruined by damp stains. Beside it lay her camera, its battery long dead, a pot with the dried remnants of boiled food, and her backpack, still full of supplies. Freeze-dried meals, gas canisters, a water filter, even her sleeping bag, all untouched, suggesting she had not starved nor been deprived of resources. What she lacked was freedom, or perhaps the clarity to use them. Forensics later confirmed what many had already suspected. The skeleton belonged to Selina Vavra. The dental records matched, and her family was contacted with the devastating news that after 3 long years of hope, the outcome was final. Yet answers remained elusive. Cause of death was listed as hypothermia, though the coroner noted a fracture at the back of her skull consistent with blunt force trauma. It was unclear whether she had fallen, struck her head, or been assaulted. The strangest detail remained the cabin itself. Who had built it, and why had Selina ended up inside? Was it an old hunter's shelter, a hermit's hideout, or something she herself had stumbled upon and repurposed? And perhaps most disturbing of all, why had she sealed herself in, only to leave frantic claw marks trying to get out? The discovery, instead of closing the case, ripped it open once more, leaving investigators, her family, and the public with more questions than before.
The discovery of Selina Vadra's remains in the tree cabin reignited the case with an intensity few expected. For weeks, Yosemite's backcountry transformed into a crime scene, with teams of forensic experts, homicide detectives, and federal investigators combing through the secluded Cedar Grove. The autopsy revealed chilling details. Selina had indeed died of hypothermia, her body succumbing to the Sierra Nevada's brutal nighttime cold. But this alone did not explain her end. A fracture on the back of her skull suggested blunt force trauma, an injury that could have come from a fall or from a strike by another person. The strangest detail was that her backpack, still intact, contained enough food, fuel, and emergency gear to have kept her alive for weeks.
Investigators debated in hushed voices. Why would someone with full supplies not use them? Why would she nail herself inside a crude cabin only to desperately claw at the wood when it became her tomb? More questions than answers piled up. The notebook fragment, "Someone was here last night," cast a long, sinister shadow over every theory. Almost immediately, suspicion swung back toward Daniel Rowe, the neighbor from Reno who had once been arrested, but released for lack of evidence. The media latched onto his name again, painting him as the obsessed loner who might have followed Selena into Yosemite to finish what he had threatened. Tabloids ran side-by-side images of Rowe's mugshot and Selena's smiling portrait, with lurid captions like, "The man who haunted her." Under renewed pressure, detectives interviewed Rowe again, scouring his alibi from 2011 with fresh eyes. They found no evidence that he had ever entered Yosemite. His work records, phone logs, and co-workers' testimonies placed him squarely in Reno at the time. Forensic tests of the cabin turned up no fingerprints other than Selena's, though years of exposure had erased much of the surface evidence. Once more, investigators were forced to admit there was no direct link between Rowe and her death, though in the public eye he was never free of suspicion. Rowe himself gave a bitter statement to a local paper. "They want me to be the villain because it's easier than admitting they don't know what happened in those woods. But I didn't kill her, the forest did." With Rowe effectively ruled out, the investigation turned toward the environment itself and the possibility of strangers lurking within it. Yosemite rangers testified about discovering signs of illegal encampments deep in the backcountry, makeshift shelters, old treat platforms, crude hunting blinds. Though these were typically linked to poachers or survivalists trying to avoid detection, the fact that Selena's body had been found in such a structure fueled speculation that she had crossed paths with someone who lived outside the law. Could she have stumbled upon one of these hidden camps, been attacked or injured and sought refuge in the tree cabin? Or was it possible that someone had already been using the cabin and she had barricaded herself inside to escape them? The scratches at the door, the nailed planks, and the ominous line in her notebook seemed to support this idea, though no living suspects were ever identified. Other theories emerged, each darker than the last. Some investigators suggested her head injury caused a psychological break, delirium, paranoia, or even hallucinations. Hypothermia itself is notorious for disorienting victims, making them shed clothes or act irrationally. Perhaps Selena had imagined someone outside, nailed herself in, and succumbed to the elements despite having resources at hand. But skeptics countered that her handwriting in the notebook was precise, deliberate, not the scrawl of a woman slipping into hypothermic confusion. She had written with clarity, "Someone was here last night." That detail gnawed at detectives. If she had only been hallucinating, why did she leave such a pointed warning? For Selena's family, the official explanations were unsatisfactory. In interviews, her sister insisted she wasn't reckless, she was prepared. If she sealed herself in, it's because she was terrified of someone out there. That cabin was a prison, not an accident. Yet the evidence remained frustratingly inconclusive. By 2015, the case file was closed with the bland phrase, "Death by hypothermia with head trauma, manner undetermined." Privately, some investigators admitted they suspected foul play, but without a living suspect, without a clear forensic link, the case could not go forward. Officially, Selena had died alone. Unofficially, whispers continued that someone else's shadow had touched her final days. And as the tree cabin was dismantled and carried out piece by rangers, the mystery seemed to evaporate with it, leaving only stories, rumors, and the chilling image of a woman who had sealed herself in against the wilderness, and maybe against something far worse.
By the spring of 2015, the official record on Selena Vera was sealed with a sterile line that angered as many as it baffled. Death by hypothermia with head trauma, manner undetermined. It was the kind of bureaucratic phrasing meant to end a case, not explain it. And for our family, it was a second death, the burial not of her body, but of the truth. They had already endured 3 years of absence, wading through search after search, clinging to a hope that had dimmed with each passing season. Now they were left with remains in a sealed casket and an autopsy report that seemed more like a shrug than an answer. At her memorial in Reno, her brother spoke through tears.
She deserved better than this. She deserved peace. Instead, we're left with questions that will never go away. The community gathered, offering condolences, but beneath the prayers and candlelight vigils ran an undercurrent of unease. The sense that Selena's story hadn't ended, that some part of it still lingered in the Sierra's cold air. For Daniel Rowe, the man once accused of being her tormentor and potential killer, the case had destroyed whatever remained of his life. Even though investigators had cleared him twice, the shadow of suspicion clung to him like smoke. Neighbors crossed the street to avoid him. Old friends stopped calling, and his employer quietly let him go after too many complaints from coworkers uncomfortable with working alongside a killer. Though no court had convicted him, the court of public opinion had, and in many ways, its verdict was harsher. In interviews, Rowe came across defensive, bitter, and broken, declaring over and over that he was innocent. They needed a villain, and I was right next door. I argued with her, yes, but I didn't follow her into those woods. I didn't kill her. The forest did that. Some saw his bitterness as guilt, others as the exhausted resentment of a man wrongly branded forever. Either way, his life was shattered, a collateral casualty of the mystery that had swallowed Selena. Meanwhile, investigators quietly admitted their own frustrations. Some whispered off the record that the case had the marks of human interference all over it: the head wound, the deliberate sealing of the cabin, the scrawled note about someone outside. But without a suspect, without fingerprints, without anything but circumstantial strangeness, their hands were tied. Others leaned toward the theory of delirium, citing how hypothermia could twist the mind, convincing its victim that threats were real when they were only hallucinations. Yet even among those, doubt remained. Selena's note was too direct, too purposeful. Her supplies were too neatly packed, and no one could explain why she had nailed herself inside a structure with no way to escape, as though turning it into a coffin she had built with her own hands. Selena's family refused to accept the accident explanation. Her sister appeared on national talk shows, speaking with a mixture of grief and steel. Selena was careful. She was experienced. She wasn't reckless. If she nailed herself inside, it's because she was terrified. Something or someone was out there with her. The question isn't whether she was alone. The question is why we don't know who it was. Her words resonated with viewers, and the story spread far beyond Reno or Yosemite, morphing into a kind of modern folktale. The hiker who vanished, the mysterious cabin in the trees, the scratched door, the haunting note. Online forums erupted with theories, some plausible, some outlandish. One theory insisted that hermits or poachers had lived in the forest and had either attacked or stalked her. Another leaned on the supernatural, suggesting the forest itself had claimed her, a ghost story in a national park that had already swallowed more than its share of lives. The truth remained stubbornly out of reach. In Yosemite, the tree cabin became an object of morbid fascination. For months after the discovery, hikers detoured into the cedar grove, trying to glimpse the grim landmark. Some carved initials into the surrounding bark, others left flowers or notes, small tributes to a woman most had never met but felt they knew through the eerie outlines of her story. Rangers, worried about both safety and sensationalism, finally made the decision to dismantle the structure. Piece by piece, the boards were pried loose, nails pulled, and the cabin lowered to the forest floor, where it was carted away on muleback. It wasn't safe to leave it, and it wasn't right for people to turn it into a shrine, one ranger explained in a clipped statement. Yet to many, dismantling the cabin felt like dismantling the last piece of evidence. The forest closed in around the empty cedar, erasing the human scar as though the cabin had never existed. But the story did not fade.
Instead, it lingered, retold around campfires, whispered in climbing gyms, repeated in hushed tones by hikers heading out on solo treks. Selena Vera became a cautionary tale, a symbol of the thin line between adventure and disappearance, between solitude and terror. Some spoke of her with reverence, as though she were a martyr of the wilderness. Others with unease, as if invoking her name might summon the same fate. And always, hanging over every retelling, was the unanswered question, what or who had driven her to nail herself inside that cabin? Years later, her brother returned to the site where her car had once been parked, now just another trailhead filled with vehicles of hikers chasing their own adventures. He left a small photograph of her on the dashboard of his rental car before locking it and whispering a promise into the alpine air. "We'll never stop asking. We'll never let them forget you." It was an act of love, but also of defiance against the silence that had swallowed the truth. For in the end, Selena's story remained unsolved, not in the sense of lacking a body, but in lacking an answer. The forest had given her back, but not the why, not the how, not the who. Those pieces remained hidden, maybe forever, in the granite shadows and cedar groves of Yosemite. And so her name became not just a headline or a case file, but a question carved into the American wilderness itself, a question that echoed like wind through the trees. Unresolved, unnerving, unforgettable.